you in the morning, and I will learn to walk in your ways. And step by step you'll lead me, and I will follow you all of my days. Oh God, you are my God, and I will ever praise you. Oh God, you are my God, and I will ever praise you. I will seek you in the morning, and I will learn to walk in your ways. And step by step you'll lead me, and I will follow you all of my days. And I will follow you all of my days. And I will follow you all of my days. And step by step you'll lead me, and I will follow you all of my days.
Well, let's go ahead and get started. Let's start with a prayer. Our Father in heaven, we love you. We're so thankful that you love us, that you have poured out your love on us, that you have lavished us with your paternal care for us. Lord, who are we that we could be called your sons and daughters? Father, thank you for including us. Thank you for giving us life and for giving us hope of knowing you and becoming more and more like you as you've revealed your character through Jesus Christ, and as you continue to transform us into your likeness by the power of your Spirit. In the name of Jesus, amen. So last week we looked at the structure of the parable of the prodigal son, as it's called. We compared the structure with the other two parables, the parable of the lost sheep and the parable of the lost coin. And we noted that they follow the same trajectory, the same narrative arc, except at the very end, there's no comment about heaven rejoicing over one repentant sinner. And that's really the only part of the puzzle that's missing. And maybe we'll explain why that is as we move further along. And then we also looked at the context last week. We looked at the setting where Jesus offers these three parables, the murmuring and grumbling of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, because Jesus was eating and enjoying the company of tax collectors and sinners. And then the theological or scriptural context, and that is, as Jesus tells this story, the hearers would have a scriptural backdrop, or they'd have had Hebrew scriptural themes running in their heads that match this parable, like sibling rivalry, a man who had two sons, and also like banishment and homecoming, or exile and return. That is very much central to Israelite thought, the idea of leaving home and then returning home. And that story of Israel, so to speak, is being told here in the parable of the prodigal son. Well, with that backdrop, with the structure and the context, we can go ahead and start looking closely at the parable itself. So, Luke chapter 15, verse 11, Jesus continued, "There was a man who had two sons. The younger one said to his father, 'Father, give me my share of the estate.' So he divided his property between them. Not long after that, the younger son got together all he had, set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. After he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in that whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and he hired himself out to a citizen of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything." Let's stop there and just kind of unpack what's happening. First of all, I want to talk about the word prodigal. It's known as the parable of the prodigal son. And if we were to go around the auditorium here and ask, what does the word prodigal mean? We might get quite a few different answers. What do you think it means? Prodigal. Some would say it means lost, because we also call this the parable of the lost son. Some think it might mean rebellious. Some think it means wayward. Some think it means wasteful. Now that's correct. It means wasteful. If you have a good old-fashioned Webster's dictionary, look it up. Look up what prodigal means in the English language. If you have a smartphone, just Google it. Look up prodigal and it'll give you a definition. It means wasteful, but it also means extravagant, over the top, lavish. If you go to Chili's someday in the distant future and order a molten lava cake and they bring it out, that's prodigal. It's over the top. It's extravagant. It's lavish. It's not frugal. It's too much. And some have looked at this story and reconsidered who the prodigal character is. Now it says that the son squandered or wasted his estate. And so he's prodigal, he's wasteful. But another way of looking at this, when you look at expand the word prodigal to mean lavish or extravagant or over the top, another way of thinking about this is that this is the parable of the prodigal father. The prodigal father whose love is extravagant, lavish, over the top, whose love is not thrifty or prudent or measured. His love is extravagant and lavish. It's prodigal. He seems to break all the boundaries of what a good nobleman, an estate-owning patriarch should do. And we'll see that even in these first few sentences. The younger one said to his father, "Father, give me my share of the estate." So he divided his property between them. I'm drawing on the research, on-the-ground research in the Middle East, Near Eastern culture of a guy named Kenneth Bailey. Kenneth Bailey wrote multiple books where he tried to get at the secrets of these parables. These parables were given to not just to reveal, but also to conceal. There's a lot of secrets, a lot of gems, pearls hidden in these parables. And he believed that if we got closer to the culture, closer to the people, understood an honor-shame-based culture, he might be able to unlock these parables. And he's given his whole life primarily to the lost parables of Luke chapter 15. And he's written a huge book on the lost parables of Luke 15. And if you think about the Middle East or the Near East, think about how things just seem to stand still. How some of the attire, the fashion there is like Bible character fashion. And so Kenneth Bailey moved there, and he lived there, and he did his research there, and he believed that a lot of the things that held that culture together, say in Israel, a lot of the things that held that culture together, or in Iraq or Iran, or a lot of Arabic kind of Arab kind of cultures. A lot of the things that hold those cultures together are still in the Bible days are still in place. So he asked this question. It's a simple question. Do adult children ask for their share of the estate when the father is still living. Not only is the father living, he's healthy. We can think back to the Old Testament in Genesis when Isaac is going to give his blessing. He's going to bless Jacob, but he's going to bless Esau, but Jacob and Rebekah come up with this deception to receive Esau's blessing. You remember that story. But you get the picture that Isaac is very, very old and kind of near death, and that's why he's easy to deceive. He can't see. But this father is not near death. He's not on his deathbed, just waiting any day now. We know that because later in the parable he runs. This father takes off running. We'll talk about that as well. But this is a healthy estate-owning nobleman. This is not a near-death father. And so the question that Kenneth Bailey asked is it ever a thing for an adult child to ask a healthy, living father for his share of the estate? And they said, no, of course not. It's not a thing. The people always said, of course not. That is not a thing. There's no such custom. And he said, what would happen if someone did ask? If one of the adult children did ask for their share of the estate? He said they would be beaten. They would just be beaten because it's you're basically saying, I wish you would go ahead and die. I love my cut of the estate more than I love you. So you're just a hurdle. You're just a barrier to what I love. I wish you would die. And so such a son would be beaten because he's brought shame upon his family. But this son makes this request, and the father divides the property between them. The father lavishly, imprudently, prodigally, extravagantly grants such an imprudent request. Now, I also want you to think that it says that so he divided his property between them. Give me my share of the estate. It's not like the father said, well, hold on a minute, and he went back and dug around and found a coffee can with a lot of gold and coins and cash. Here's your share of the estate. Sometimes that's the way, but it's not like that. Remember, this story is being told by an Israelite to Israelites, and we're talking about property and estate. And so this is going to take a little time. It's not like I can just go cough up the cash and here now send you on your way. It could be that this is not so much a liquid kind of family. It could be that this is more like a landowning family. Now, if you're an Israelite and you're telling this parable to Israelites, and you're thinking about the land, you're thinking about the promised land, and this story is being told in the promised land, I want you to think about the shame that's brought upon the family when this son is wanting to put up a for sale sign on some parcel of land of the promised land so that he can take his cut and go off to what Scripture calls a distant country. So it's going to take a little while. There's some time. There's a little bit of a margin of time that it takes for him to gather, for him to liquefy, for him to pull the belongings and the estate, his portion of the estate together. But the father goes ahead and grants all that, all the embarrassment of liquefying and taking family land or family property and family estate and figuring out his cut, turning it into cash so that he can walk right out of the village with all that is due him, ultimately. Not long after that, the younger son got together all he had, everything, turned all of it into cash, and set out for a distant country. You should hear that as a far country. You should hear that as Egypt. You should hear that as Babylon. In other words, this is that old familiar story of exile. He's going off to a far country. We know that this is not just a neighboring Jewish country that he goes to. In this story, that Jesus, a Jew, talking to Jews, has this young son go off to a Gentile country. We know that because of what he ends up doing. While he's there, what's his occupation? After he loses everything and he has to go to work, he's working for a pig farmer. And if he's working for a pig farmer, he's certainly not in the promised land anymore. He is in exile. He is self-banished. He has gone far, far, far from the promised land, far from home, just like Israel did in the Old Testament. This is Israel's story in a parable. So he went off to a distant country, and there he squandered his wealth in wild living. It's another way of thinking of his prodigality. He was wasteful. And after he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in that whole country. By the way, think of your knowledge of the Old Testament, how many times famine showed up. And how God worked through that famine to call his children back. Think about the role that the famine played in reunifying the children of Jacob, sons of Israel. Okay, so after he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in that whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and he hired himself out to a citizen of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed pigs. So how far he has gone, that he's now hired himself out to an unclean profession, to do an unclean profession, to feed pigs. And now he's longing so much during this time of hunger, he's longing to eat what the unclean animals eat. When a Jew is telling this story to Jews, this must be horrifying. This is the very, very, very bottom rung. This is as low as you could get. This is as far as you could travel. And even then, the unclean pigs were unwilling to share their food with him. Verse 17 says, when he came to his senses, or when he came to himself, when he found himself, he has this aha moment. One day, as his stomach is growling and he's longing to eat what the pigs eat, he has this aha moment. He comes to his senses. He comes to himself. He finds himself. And he has this dialogue with himself. He says, verse 17, how many of my father's hired men have food to spare, and here I am starving to death? And he comes up with a game plan. I'm going to go home. This is the return from exile, the story of Israel coming back. I'm going to go home. I will set out and I will go back to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. Now you remember how those previous two parables ended. That heaven rejoices over one repentant sinner. Heaven rejoices over one repentant sinner. And here is this sinner, not a sheep, not a coin. Here is a sinner, an adult child, who goes back to his father with this speech: I have sinned. I have sinned against heaven, and I have sinned against you, and I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Just make me like one of your hired men. So that's the game plan. He knows where he's going to go, and he knows what he's going to say, and so he gets up and he goes to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, he threw his arms around him, and he kissed him. Now this is extravagant. This is prodigal. This is lavish. This would have been perceived as imprudent and wasteful. This kind of treatment of this miserable wretch of a son who comes dragging back smelling like unclean animals. The father's love is over the top. I want us to think for a little bit. I guess probably for 30, 35 maybe years of my life, this is such a familiar parable. I always pictured, and maybe because of some paintings or something, I always pictured the father kind of living, if you saw the John Wayne movie, The Searchers, kind of living on a ranch, maybe the Ponderosa, living on a ranch and looking over the dunes and seeing a silhouette of a lonely, maybe that's my son out there. And the father was searching the horizon, looking for his son, and he sees him far away in this desolate sort of ranch-type estate. But that's not the case. That's not the case here. We find out that can't be the case because it doesn't take long for him to kick up a party. It doesn't take long for him to kick up a celebration. It doesn't take long for there to be guests with music, it says, and dancing in verse 25. So it's a village. And that's important to understand, that it's not just a man living with his older son and waiting for his younger son to come home. There's a full-fledged party, a celebration that happens because he lives in a village. All that to say that when that son starts approaching the house, he's got to walk by other people's homes to get to his own home. This is a shame. This is the walk of shame. Here he comes, the one who had to sell the property, the one who had to liquefy the estate, the one who just headed out of town, never to come back, turned it all into cash, goes off to the far country, and it doesn't take long before he's back and he has nothing. The walk of shame. And this is what the father does. While he was still a long way off, the father saw him, was filled with compassion for him, not hatred, not anger. He was filled with compassion for him. And he ran to his son. Kenneth Bailey asked people in this Middle Eastern, Near Eastern culture, he asked them, think about an estate owner, a Middle Eastern estate owner, or a nobleman, somebody that owns land that has servants working for him. Do those men run? Is there ever any reason to see a upper middle-aged estate owner run? And the answer to that question is usually was some sort of laughter. Of course not. No, it's undignified. It's unbecoming. It's not what a dignified, estate-owning patriarch would ever do. To gird up his silly-looking skirt and to take off running, showing his knees, of course not. It's humiliating. It's embarrassing. It's shameful. And this father runs. Okay, well, maybe he's running to beat him. Maybe he's running to bring the shame upon him that belongs to him. He's embarrassed not just the father, not just himself. He's embarrassed the whole village. He's embarrassed the land of God, promised land. Maybe he's running out there to beat him as he should. But no, he runs to him and he throws his arms around him and he kisses him. Maybe one reason why the father runs is to take the shame upon himself. You know, people working out in their yard and they see this one come back. Oh, everybody's talking about it. The tisk, 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 the shame, shame, shame. Everybody just stops what they're doing and watches this miserable wretch come back. What an embarrassment to the village, and how embarrassing this must be for the father. And the father, instead, is willing to take the embarrassment upon himself by running. Look at him run. Don't look at my son anymore. You want to laugh at somebody, you want to be embarrassed for somebody, be embarrassed for me. Because I love my son, and I don't want you to feel that way about him any longer. In fact, I'm going to give him a place of honor. This son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven, and I have sinned against you, and I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. And before the boy even finished his little prepared speech, the father said to his servants, Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger, sandals on his feet, and bring the fattened calf and kill it. Over the top, lavish, extravagant celebration. Let's have a feast and let's celebrate, for this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. And so they began to celebrate. Let's stop right there. And I hope that you will actually read Luke chapter 15 closely, and perhaps you'll even have some questions about the study. And I would love for you to in the YouTube, if you're doing it, if you're watching this on YouTube, if there's comments and you want to ask a question about it, then ask a question, and I'll check it and see if we can address it next week. God bless. Hope you'll have a safe and healthy remainder of the week.
How deep the Father's love for us, how vast beyond all measure, that He should give His only Son to make a wretch His treasure. How great the pain of searing loss, the Father turns His face away, as wounds which mar the chosen one bring many sons to glory. Behold the man upon a cross, my sin upon His shoulders. Ashamed, I hear my mocking voice call out among the scoffers. It was my sin that held Him there until it was accomplished. His dying breath has brought me life. I know